At 75, I moved a little slower than I used to, but my hands still remembered every recipe I ever learned. The rosemary garlic roast especially, my late husband's favorite, Marla's favorite when she was a child, and the dish everyone in the family still praised. I prepared it with the same care as always, marinating it overnight, waking early to sear it just right, then letting it cook low and slow for hours until the house filled with that warm, comforting smell that carried years of memories on its back. I thought cooking for my daughter's dinner party would make me feel included, needed, loved. At 75, you hold on to the small ways your family invites you in. A grocery list handed to you, a request to help in the kitchen, a seat at the table. Little things that whisper, you still matter. When I arrived at Marla's house with the roast wrapped carefully in foil, I saw the driveway packed with cars. Inside, the chatter of guests filled the place, her friends, her husband's co-workers, neighbors I'd never met. Marla barely greeted me. She glanced at the roast and said, "Good, put it in the kitchen. We're running behind." No hook. No thank you. Just a hurried instruction like I was another appliance that had finally been delivered. I swallowed the sting and placed the roast on the counter. The kitchen was bustling, someone uncorking wine, someone else arranging appetizers. Every time I tried to ask if she needed help, Marla responded with, "Not now, Mom, just move out of the way," without even looking at me. I told myself she was stressed. Hosting was hard. I tried to ignore how invisible I felt. But invisibility becomes unbearable when someone turns you into an object. When the guests finally moved to the dining table, I followed, hoping Marla had at least saved me a seat. That was when she stood tall at the head of the table, a glass of wine in her hand, and announced instructions for the meal. "Everyone will serve themselves from the counter," she said. "And Mom," she turned to me, waving her hand as if shooing a child, "you'll eat after everyone else." The room fell quieter than a church. Forks stopped clinking. Even the air seemed to freeze in place. My heart stuttered. At first, I thought I misheard. Surely my own daughter wouldn't tell me, her 75-year-old mother, the woman who raised her alone, that I was to eat last, like a servant waiting for scraps. But she looked right at me, no guilt, no hesitation. Just entitlement. One of her friends gave a half-laugh that died quickly when no one joined in. I stared at Marla. She didn't avert her eyes. That almost hurt more than the insult itself. A warmth spread through my chest. Not anger, not sadness, but a quiet, deep certainty. A line had been crossed. Not just crossed, destroyed. I didn't argue. Arguing meant I still expected kindness from her. Instead, I turned, walked calmly into the kitchen, uncovered the roast, and placed the lid securely on top. I lifted it with both hands, feeling its weight. Years of sacrifice rested inside that pan. Nights I didn't eat so she could. Mornings I worked double shifts. Holidays where I gave her the biggest portion. She didn't deserve it. "Mom, what are you doing?" Marla demanded, stepping forward. I didn't answer. I walked past her guests, past the table where a seat for me had never been set. At the doorway, I paused and finally spoke, my voice steady. "I gave you everything. But I will not give you my dignity." Then I walked out of her house, roast in hand, feeling lighter than I had in years. When I arrived home that night, the roast still warm inside its pan, the silence of my house greeted me like an old, patient friend. I set the pan down on the table and sat heavily in my chair, feeling the weight of the evening settle into my bones. For a long moment, I didn't eat. I just stared at the steam rising from the roast. Steam that should have filled a room of people who, at the very least, respected me. Instead, it rose into my quiet kitchen, curling into the air like a final reminder of where I truly belonged. As I finally cut myself a slice, memories rose with the scent. Not sharp memories, the kind you wish you could bury, but soft ones that somehow hurt more. I remembered being 29, newly widowed, holding baby Marla while my husband's funeral photograph sat on the dresser. I remembered whispering promises to her tiny sleeping face. "I'll give you everything I can. Everything I have." And I had kept that promise, for years, for decades, so fiercely that I forgot there were limits to a mother's sacrifice. I remembered the nights I worked late at the diner, wiping down counters after midnight while Marla slept in the back booth, her head resting on a folded apron. I remembered slipping my coat over her when the old heater broke down. I would drive home exhausted, body aching, but heart steady because I believed I was building us a future. Then came her teenage years. The slammed doors. The rolling eyes. The biting remarks. I dismissed them as growing pains, never imagining that entitlement could harden into something permanent. When she criticized my cooking, I laughed it off. When she told her friends I was old-fashioned, I pretended not to hear. When she refused to visit me on holidays because her boyfriend had better plans, I told myself every young person goes through phases. But phases end. Patterns don't. As I took another bite of roast, a bitter truth settled in. I had taught her to take me for granted. I thought love meant giving without expecting anything in return. I believed a mother's duty was to make herself small so her child could grow. But maybe I had shrunk too much, until she could no longer see me at all. The longer I sat there, the clearer the memories became. Moments I once brushed aside now flashing like warning signs I had ignored. The time she complained that the birthday gift I bought her wasn't the right brand. The time I lent her money for her rent, and she didn't even say thank you, just assumed I'd cover it again the next month. The time she canceled dinner with me because her husband's friends wanted to go out, and she told me, "You can eat alone. You're used to it." That one had hurt. I denied it then, but it was true. I had become used to being alone, used to sitting in quiet rooms, waiting for her to remember I existed. Tonight, though, I wasn't waiting. Tonight, I was awakening. As I finished eating, I realized something important. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes slowly, wrapped in the softness of family, in the familiarity of a child's face. It grows silently over years, until one day it stands tall in front of a crowded room and says, "You'll eat after everyone else." A single sentence, spoken casually, can unravel decades of love. I set down my fork and took a deep breath. Pain lingered, but so did clarity. Marla's cruelty tonight wasn't an accident. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a moment of thoughtlessness. It was who she had become. And I had finally seen it clearly. That was the moment I made a quiet, steady promise to myself. One I had never made before. I will not allow my own child to treat me like I am nothing. And with that promise, something inside me shifted. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of my revenge. The morning sunlight crept softly through my curtains, warming the edge of my pillow. For the first time in years, I woke not out of habit or obligation, but from sleep that had the strange, light feeling of a burden lifted. Painful clarity can be a gift. It forces you to step into a truth you've ignored. I made myself a cup of tea Earl Grey, with the faint scent of bergamot, and sat at the dining table. The roast pan from the night before was still sitting there, half covered. I lifted the foil and took in the aroma. It no longer reminded me of sacrifice. It reminded me of self-respect. While sipping my tea, I opened the old wooden lockbox under the table. It held papers I hadn't looked at in years, bank statements, investment documents, the deed to a rental cottage my husband and I had bought decades ago. I had never boasted about it, never flaunted it. I simply saved, invested, and lived modestly. Marla believed I was an old woman surviving on a small pension. She had no idea that I had protected myself long before she stopped caring. As I ran my fingers across the documents, I realized something simple and liberating. I was not trapped. Not financially, not emotionally, not socially. My silence had trapped me, not my circumstances. That realization ignited something fierce inside me. Something that felt strangely like youth. Like I had stepped into a part of myself I had forgotten. The first thing I did was call my attorney. A kind man, older himself, who had handled paperwork for my husband many years ago. "I'd like to update my will," I told him. My voice was steady. "And I'd like to remove someone." He didn't ask questions. I think he heard everything he needed to in my tone. I left Marla only $1. It wasn't meant to be petty. It was a statement. Proof that her exclusion was intentional, not an oversight. I attached a letter, short, calm, unemotional, explaining that she had chosen to treat me with disrespect, and I had chosen to respond with distance. After that, I canceled the auto payments I had set up for her house bills. I had been covering her electricity, her insurance, and sometimes her groceries for years. She had grown accustomed to the support, convinced it was her right. It was never her right. It was my kindness. A kindness I no longer felt she deserved. That week, when her electricity bill came due and wasn't paid by me, she called. "Mom, did your bank mess something up? The bill didn't go through." "No," I answered gently, stirring my tea. "I stopped paying it." A pause. "Shock. What? Why?" "I'm retired from being taken for granted," I said simply. She didn't know what to say. She ended the call. I didn't feel guilty. Not even for a moment. Instead, I felt free. The next step in my quiet revenge wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply living. I joined a book club at the community center. I met Eleanor, a widow with a laugh that sounded like bells, and Grace, who baked the best lemon loaf I'd ever tasted. I rejoined the gardening group I had abandoned years ago when Marla claimed she needed more help with the kids. The roses in my yard soon looked healthier than I felt in years. I cooked for myself, not for gratitude, not for approval, just for joy. And slowly, I realized something beautiful. The world had not shrunk with age. I had allowed it to shrink around Marla. With every small step I took away from her demands, the world opened again. Wider. Brighter. Kinda. My quiet revenge wasn't about punishing her. It was about reclaiming the life she had convinced me I didn't deserve. It was about choosing myself. Maybe for the first time. Weeks passed. Life, for the first time in decades, began to feel like mine again. The mornings were quiet but full of possibility, the afternoons filled with friends who listened, laughed, and respected me. And in this quiet reclamation of my life, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any fleeting victory. This was not vengeance that burned. This was justice that soothed. Then came the family gathering, a cousin's birthday dinner. I was invited, and I went, not out of obligation but because I chose to. I dressed carefully, wearing a soft blue dress that matched my eyes, letting my hair fall in gentle curls, remembering how my husband used to compliment me. I carried with me a calm confidence, the kind that only comes from knowing you have finally decided you matter. As soon as I arrived, I sensed the tension. Marla's eyes flicked toward me, and I could feel the thinly veiled resentment radiating off her. But I kept walking with a small, serene smile, greeting relatives who hadn't seen me in months. Everyone noticed the change. They noticed me. A few whispered compliments, and I let them reach me like sunlight through the cold glass of a winter window. Dinner started. Laughter floated over plates of mashed potatoes and roasted vegetables. And then Marla, emboldened, made her move. Loudly, in front of the table, she said, "Mom abandoned us at my dinner party. She embarrassed me. She left me and humiliated me in front of my friends." I set down my fork slowly. The words didn't hurt. They were transparent, shallow, desperate. I looked at her calmly, and for the first time in years, I did not flinch. I did not defend myself to someone who had never respected me. Instead, I spoke with a gentle, deliberate voice, the kind that commands attention without shouting. "No, Marle. You embarrassed yourself. You humiliated your own mother when you told her, a 75-year-old woman, that she would eat after everyone else." I simply removed myself from the disrespect. The table froze. Forks hung in the air. Silence draped over the room like a soft blanket. Marla's friends shifted uncomfortably, her husband coughed, and I could see the sudden realization dawn in her eyes. For the first time, her pride faltered. No one argued with me. No one tried to defend her. The truth, when spoken clearly and calmly, is a force stronger than any tantrum or manipulation. I continued, still gentle, still steady. I have lived a long life, and I have learned that respect is not something you demand from those who love you. It is something you grant yourself. And I chose to grant myself dignity instead of allowing it to be taken. Marla opened her mouth, but no words came. She had nothing to say, not because I had shouted, not because I had threatened, but because she knew deep down that she had overstepped, that she had lost a mother she had taken for granted for far too long. After dinner, as I walked out to my car, I felt a lightness in my chest. A niece I had always loved pulled me aside and whispered, "Auntie, I am proud of you. I've never seen anyone stand so calmly and firmly. I smiled. Thank you, I said. It feels good to finally choose myself. The night air was cool, brushing against my face as I slid into the driver's seat. For the first time in years, I felt the expansive freedom of my own life. I had not only survived humiliation, I had transformed it. I had taken what was meant to wound me and turned it into strength. My revenge was not cruel or loud. It was peaceful, dignified, and complete. Marla would remember this night forever. Not because I shouted, or schemed, or humiliated her back. She would remember because I had chosen to love myself more than I allowed her disrespect to continue. That was my victory. That was my justice. That was my freedom. And as I drove home, headlights cutting through the dark streets, I realized the most satisfying revenge of all is quiet, unshakable, and lived every day. You reclaim yourself. You walk away. You choose your peace. At 75, I had learned the most important truth of my life. Dignity, once taken, can be reclaimed. And when it is, it tastes sweeter than any roast ever could.